Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the UE SP Student Chapter and UTT SP Student Chapter, we would like to welcome you all to our technical talk this afternoon entitled Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage. My name is Daniel Joseph, and I will be your moderator for today's session. So before we begin, we would just like to review some of the ground rules or house rules for the session, right? And these include, based on the profiles that you all would have created, we would encourage you all to, use our profile picture or image if necessary, and also to use your name, right? So that the instructors, or in this case, the speakers, would know who you are if you are not using video or microphone, right? We understand that disruptions are normal, and so you are not in a classroom setting, and we know that, so life will happen around you, and that is okay. So we just ask that, you probably just mute your mic or remove your camera if you need to step away from in front of your device, right? If you have no video or no microphone to use, that's not a problem. We encourage you to participate by using the chat function. Again, if you are not speaking or need to step away from the meeting, just remember to mute your mic, and video chat function is optional, right? It's a great way for interaction, but if it makes you uncomfortable, we respect your privacy. And virtual backgrounds also afford privacy if you want us to see you, but not your surroundings. Something to also just to keep in mind is that please remember to never share any confidential information or sensitive information in this Zoom meeting or chat, right? One more thing, if you have any questions or comments for our speakers whilst they are presenting, you can type them in the chat or ask those questions after both presentations have been completed when we have our questions and comments segment, right? And lastly, just please note that the session is being recorded. So to begin our session this afternoon, carbon capture involves the capturing of anthropogenic waste CO2, transporting it to a storage site, and depositing it into sinks such as geological reservoirs or aquifers where it cannot enter the atmosphere. Carbon capture and storage, CCS or CCUS, can be applied to large point sources such as fossil fuel energy facilities like the natural gas power plants located in Trinidad. It is with this in mind that the Society of Petroleum Engineers Student Chapter at the University of the West Indies, in collaboration with the SP Student Chapter at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, has decided to host a technical talk on this topic, right? Where the speakers of this technical talk will include Dr. David Alexander and Dr. Lorraine Sobers. So just to give you a quick overview of who our speakers are, Dr. David Alexander holds a BSc in Chemistry, Analytical Chemistry, and an MSc in Petroleum Engineering from the University of the West Indies. He also holds a PhD in the field of Petroleum Engineering from the University of Trinidad and Tobago, UTT, in collaboration with the University of Texas at Austin. He has further specialized training with the Computer Modeling Group, a reservoir engineering software, judicial writing from the University of Nevada, and environmental mediation from Vermont Law School. He was a demonstrator part-time at UE in chemistry from 2002 to 2004. Between the years of 2004 and 2007, Dr. Alexander worked at Petrochem, Lever Brothers, and Rio Claro College. He joined the UTT full-time in 2007, lecturing mainly in mathematics, chemistry, and petroleum engineering courses at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels. He has over 25 publications in enhanced oil recovery, carbon capture and storage, and waste oil management, amongst other areas. He is a member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, SPE, and the Energy Institute UK. He also served as a member of the Environmental Commission of Trinidad and Tobago, ECTT, Director of New Opportunities of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, SPETT, member of the Global Training Committee of the Society of Petroleum Engineers International, SPI, and membership and education advisor in the Energy Institute UK Caribbean branch. Dr. Alexander has served on several other committees, including the Low Emissions Capacity Building Program, LECB, and has done consultancy work in the area of waste oil management. He is currently the program leader of the Energy Systems Engineering Unit at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, UTT, and we are glad to have him in our session this evening. Our other speaker is Dr. Lauren Sobers, and Dr. Lauren Sobers is a Fulbright scholar with a first degree in chemical engineering and a master's degree in petroleum engineering from Texas Tech University. In 2012, Dr. Sobers earned her PhD in petroleum engineering at Imperial College, London. She is currently a lecturer at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, specializing in CO2 storage injection strategies to maximize storage. In 2016, Dr. Sobers developed and spearheaded the CO2 Enhanced Oil Recovery Roadmap, CERM project, now the CO2 Emissions Reduction Mobilization Project, to facilitate and integrate national approach to use CO2 emission reduction techniques in the energy sector. Dr. Sobers has presented at several technical and socioeconomic conferences locally and regionally on issues arising out of CO2, EOR, and CO2 emission reduction in Trinidad and Tobago as a small island development state. She is a junior fellow of Caribbean Policy Consortium. Dr. Sobers is a SPE certified petroleum engineer and formerly served on the SPETT board as director of continuing education for 5 years, where she introduced the SPE certification examination to Trinidad and Tobago, which resulted in 12 members becoming SPE certified. Dr. Sobers also served on the SPE International Educational and Accreditation Committee from 2016 to 2019. In 2016, Dr. Sobers became a certified ABET program evaluator for petroleum engineering. And again, we are glad to have her in our session this evening. So to jump right into the presentations, first to begin with, we would like to have Dr. Alexander and his presentation, followed by Dr. Sobers and her presentation, and then we will have a questions and comment section right after. So, Dr. Alexander, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Alexander, and more or less the talk today in two parts is about carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And for my section, more or less, I will outline what the problem really is. For those of you who are new to it, I know some of you who are present are actually experts in the area. Then I'll talk about what is CCS and how does it work. I will just point up to some of the worldwide applications, about 4 of them, so that you will see that things are really progressing in a really nice direction. I will basically touch on some of the potential for CCS in Trinidad and Tobago, because I know Dr. Sobers will go into more details with that. And I have a concluding point that you will see that may be of interest to you. So where does the problem begin? To believe it or not, whether we like it or not, fossil fuels will play a major role in the energy mix for the next few decades. There's very little that can be done to prevent that, simply because if you look at all the energy profiles for companies going forward for the next 3 years, the 2050 targets that you are seeing, you notice that natural gas is going to play a major role in this energy transition that we are forecasting. And although there will be reductions in usage for coal and oil, and supplemented by renewable energy sources, etc., as we will see later on, we can't simply just do away with fossil fuels because of the high demand for it. So yes, there will be reduction, but the energy mix will take some time. That transition will take a long time. Some of you will actually retire, etc., before fossil fuels go down in a way that is extremely significant. So some facts are that while we use fossil fuels, it produces a byproduct called carbon dioxide in an abundant way. In fact, there are many different greenhouse gases, but the most abundant is carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide absorbs infrared heat, right? Radiation. And because of the large concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it is trapping the heat that should go out of the atmosphere and it is causing the global temperature to become warmer. So the fact is carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is increasing, hence it's causing the global average temperature to increase. And some other stubborn facts that we'll observe is that since the COVID-19 pandemic, what we have seen, although there have been major shutdowns across the globe, reduction in transportation and movement and so on, even reduction in activities in the industrial sector, there was only a 17% decline in terms of greenhouse gas emissions in early April 2020. However, so we had a decrease. However, we are seeing that carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere hit an average high of 417 parts per million in May 2020, just 1 month later. So the point is, even though we had a reduction in our activities that generate carbon dioxide, yet we had an overall increase in concentration. And so the other stubborn fact that plagues us is if we decided to stop emitting carbon dioxide from all our processes today, it will still take thousands of years for our emissions to be absorbed into the ocean and other atmospheric methods, different methods, what we are thinking about, to pre-industrial levels. So that's something to think about. Assume that we were able to stop producing carbon dioxide and venting it into the atmosphere, we will still have this big challenge in our hands. So if we take a look at the bigger picture, and I always use this slide because it's kind of important to bring context into what we are doing. Just a decade ago, the target for reduction was about 7 gigatons per year. It's a bit higher now. You'll see the figure later on. But 7 gigatons is a really good starting point because initially when the conversations were very deep and a lot of global leaders were thinking about what targets they want to achieve, this was the target that the global arena was looking at. And so what we realized from, let me just put on my pointer. Let's see what I'm saying. Yeah, so what we are seeing from this chart here of year on the x-axis versus emissions in metric tons on the y-axis is that we need to do several different techniques to be able to achieve the targets that we want. So we need to look at energy efficiency and conservation. We need to incorporate renewable energy. Now that yellow bar might get wider and wider with time. We need to incorporate other forms of energy like nuclear and gas substitution for coal. But a major player in all of this will be carbon capture and storage. And this came from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. Another important plot that I normally share is that if we look at the year on the x-axis and we have world GDP per capita on the y-axis and million tons of oil equivalent on the y-axis also, what we would realize is that as the global population increases, the world GDP also increases. And so people want a better standard of life. So they want air condition, they want microwave, they want washer and dryer that uses a lot of energy and so on. So the energy demand also increases. So as world population increase, energy demand increase, and as GDP increases, the standard of living is also increasing. And this energy demand has to come from somewhere, right? And so if we continue going along that path, we would be producing large quantities of carbon dioxide, and we will the problem will just get more worse. So just to look at what is required to store 1 gigaton of carbon, and remember the target was 7 gigatons a decade ago, it's a bit higher now, we would need to set up a business that is comparable to the oil and gas business today. And what do I mean by that? We actually use about, let's say, 97 million barrels of oil per day, give or take globally. And if we needed to sequester 1 wedge of carbon dioxide in geologic formations or whatever technique we want to use, it will be close to 100 million barrels of oil per day. So think about that. We want to sequester 1 gigaton of carbon, and we need to set up an industry almost the size of our existing oil and gas industry today to manage something like that. And people want to say, okay, how do people come up with these net zero targets? Or no, it's 2050 and not 2060 or not 2030, etc. A good article to look at is a study published by the WWF. You just have to Google them and you see. And what they did in principle is they said that, here what? We can emit about 1,600 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and carbon dioxide equivalent means this takes into consideration other greenhouse gases. And for this period between 1990 and 2100, we shouldn't cross that limit or else we'll be in problems. And so over the last 20 years, we have emitted a significant portion of this 1,600. And so the point is, we are left with about 870 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent to be able to stay within our limits, stay within our budget, stay within our targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, what they did is they said, okay, if we divide this remaining amount by our current emission rate, which is about 9.5 gigaton equivalent, then 91 years from now, we should be able to stay within our budget. But what they were saying is if the current global rate of 47 gigatons of carbon dioxide emission equivalent per year continues, then we will use up our remaining budget by the year 2030. And so there are a number of other authors existing out there using different factors and different considerations. But the point is, this is how they look at the carbon budget, and this is how they work out the targets that of 2040, 2050, 2060, etc. So Daniel gave us a nice little video and an introduction of what is sequestration. Fundamentally, once you capture and securely store carbon from being emitted from the global energy system, we consider that to be sequestration. And there are three main types. If you read, you will find others, but the three categories that are most prominent are ocean sequestration, those if we store carbon dioxide in the ocean floors, terrestrial sequestration, if we store it in soil and vegetation and trees, etc. And then geologic sequestration, which is our main focus these days because it has a really large capacity to store CO2. And you'll hear a little more about that later on. And so in terms of geologic sequestration, we can store carbon dioxide in deep saline aquifers, unminable coal beds, and depleted oil and gas reservoirs. For us, in Trinidad and Tobago, our focus will be on deep saline aquifers and depleted oil and gas reservoirs. And maybe our higher priority might be depleted oil and gas reservoirs. It really depends on what the global dynamics is. But we know that we have the ability to store carbon dioxide into depleted oil and gas reservoirs because that's a lot of our training and background. And when we place the carbon dioxide in these geologic formations, we can trap them in different mechanisms, seal trap, soluble, if it dissolves in the reservoir fluid, mineralization, so when it reacts with the rocks and it forms solid, and residual phase trapping. So mineralization is one of the safest mechanisms. Once it becomes a solid, then it becomes immovable. But that method, it takes thousands of years for the carbon dioxide to become dissolved and then precipitate into some minerals. So we hardly investigate that because a lot of previous studies have shown that that takes pretty long to do. Some other considerations that we have to take into account is the cost. It's very expensive, it's capital extensive. Public acceptance, the people must be willing to accept that this technology can help, otherwise that will cause a lot of problems. And then we have the issue of leakage, where if we put it into geologic formations, there's the potential for it to leak out of the reservoir. So leakage and monitoring is another key factor that we have to pay attention to. So risk of leakage is really one of the deep consideration that we should pay attention to, simply because if we inject carbon dioxide on the ground and it leaks back to surface through abandoned wells or through faults, etc., then that project may be considered an unsuccessful project. And so a lot of effort has to be placed into monitoring and looking at what are the pathways for leakage. Now, people have been talking about carbon capture and storage for a long time. In fact, I think when I started in 2007 to look at this area, and maybe the other speaker had the same experience, we have heard a lot about carbon capture and storage, and this will be very important for climate change, etc. But for the past 10 years, we haven't heard or seen any significant progress in terms of making it happen, apart from basic pilot studies and a lot of research. But it wasn't until 2018 when the IPCC reevaluated where we are in terms of climate change response and what targets we need to meet, similar to what I spoke about with the carbon budget, that they realized that if we don't incorporate all the different technologies that we know about to be able to meet the 1.5 degree target, then we'll be in some problems. And the report also highlighted that if carbon capture and storage is not utilized in the arsenal to be able to fight climate change, then we will not be able to meet our targets. And since then, we have seen a lot of companies changing their direction, changing what their internal policies are, changing their business model, because this report is really a significant report in terms of talking about CCS. And even the US in 2018, so it was a significant year for CCS, they developed a 45Q tax, which gave incentive to companies who want to do either EOR using CO2, they would get these tax incentives, or if you wanted to do straight geologic storage, they showed you where you can get 50 US per ton if you do geologic storage, and 35 US per ton for EOR projects. So those things are really good incentives that made things happen. If you look at this chart here, this is something very important. Let me just, so it really was from 1971 to 2017. If you look at this chart and you look at the dark blue area, you would realize from 1971 to 2017, what we have seen is a growth in terms of EOR usage for using CO2, EOR using CO2. So on the y-axis, this is number of projects. So we see from 0 to 400 number of projects. And as we move from left to right, we see that CO2 is being used as one of the most major EOR techniques today. So that is something of great significance, right? The other global thing that you would see is that people are trying to make good use of captured CO2. So you would see that a lot of things coming up with clean carbon and carbon utilization. And you'd see, for example, that they are capturing carbon dioxide using different methods and converting it to soda ash. And this soda ash now can be used as an ingredient for a number of household products, glass manufacturing, and paper production. And there are a number of other things that it can do. You will see that in the production of hydrogen, because hydrogen is one of the hot topics these days in terms of energy, that if we want to be able to create hydrogen as a fuel, then what we need to do is, if we use methane as the main product, then we can combine that with carbon capture and storage to produce blue hydrogen. And as you would see, in as recent as this year, the European Parliament voted that blue hydrogen should be produced from natural gas using CCS as a bridge, so that whenever the technology, renewable energy technology becomes cheaper, that we can move towards green hydrogen instead. You would also see collaborations globally taking place. For example, China and Canada combining to use CO2 capture for cement. And even further, countries that produce hydrocarbons and sell it to other countries will eventually be taxed if you cannot prove that you are using climate change. You have in mind climate change technology. So the point is, eventually legislation will govern how we do our imports and exports. And that will play a major role, and CCS will help us with that. Now, just a few more slides, some of the lessons that we learned from simple analysis. We spoke about previously ocean sequestration, terrestrial, and geologic. And although terrestrial is the safest, when you do a simple calculation, if we assume Trinidad was totally planted by tropical rainforest, for example, then we would only be able to store around 5.5 million metric tons, less than 15% of our emissions. Ocean is safe and unreliable because there are no trapping mechanisms there, so we are not sure where that CO2 will go. So geologic storage is our next bet. Now, as we mentioned before, leakage is an important factor. And so in terms of local studies, we have done a lot of work looking at what is the risk of leakage. And one of the key things that we found is that carbon dioxide can be trapped for thousands of years in our reservoirs once the fault and the cap rock is sealing. The other thing that we have identified from some of our local studies that we have some really good sources of CO2, example, process emissions from ammonia synthesis, from Atlantic LNG, from PPGL. So we have really good point sources that are easy to capture CO2 from. And the other thing that we have done is we have looked at different modes of transporting carbon dioxide and what the cost will be, what the cost implication will be. So we started putting the puzzle together as to how this should be done. The other thing we have done locally is we have started evaluating what is the potential of carbon capture and storage in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have made representation of this at the Congress of Parties from COP23 to COP25. Hopefully we were able to do it this year in COP26. And the University of the West Indies and the University of Trinidad and Tobago have started combining our efforts to be able to make this happen. You will hear about that from Dr. Sobers. But we did a workshop together, and it was a 2-day workshop. And on day 2 of the workshop, we had a really fruitful discussion, and the discussion was with the institutions on the left. And some of the things that we came up with was, do we drop EOR? Do we look at regional opportunities for CCS? But the key one that stood out for us is the development of a geologic storage atlas. And so that geologic storage atlas, we have been partnering together to be able to drive that. I think Dr. Subas will talk more about it. But what I wanted to leave you all with is that there's a great opportunity for geoscience and engineering people once this technology is adopted, and once we have climate change targets to achieve, then this will be a major player in it. So we have a lot to look forward to. And I see that as an opportunity. So thank you. So that's it for me.
So yeah, thanks, David, for that presentation. And probably moving quickly along one time, Dr. Sobers, the floor is also yours.
Okay, let me just share this presentation, which is more of a discussion style about, so we have the science behind us. Dr. Alexander did a great job of putting the issue in context of numbers, timeline, policy, and the science behind it. So what I'm going to talk about is mainly what is happening, what has happened on the ground, and what is happening on the ground. So I'm going to give you a background of the CERM project and a minor update on what is going on. So I may not be able to cover everything here. I will not be able to cover everything here, but we do have a website that has a lot of resources on the background of the science and the policy And all the presentations from the symposium that we and UTT joined together to do, which was sponsored by BP and BHP, and widely attended within the organization. So all those presentations are on the website. And if you're interested in this, I encourage you to take a look there for information. But I think Dr. Alexander gave a great setup for me to now go into what really happens on the ground. So what I decided to do is just give you a snapshot of what happened by June 2018. 2017 was when the CERM project was launched. Basically, we approached several institutions. I worked together with, at the time, Professor Wayne Bertrand. We first approached UTT. I remember speaking to Dr. Alexander, and he's like, yes, we're on board because UTT does research in that area, and so did we. And we moved forward and we approached Petrotrin, and they said yes. And so then it's like, how are we going to get this together? And so we approached the ministry, and the Ministry of Energy called together of course, the two universities, right? Because we don't really have the authority to call people together like that. I wonder if that's the right way to say it. But it's better coming from the ministry, because they also called together Petrotrin and NGC and some other stakeholders that you will see participated in our first workshop. So by the first year, we had a name. It was the Carbon Dioxide Enhanced Oil Recovery Roadmap. This is where we started because we were dealing in a climate where our oil production was falling, and we really needed to get our oil production up. So Carbon Dioxide Enhanced Oil Recovery Roadmap was a way for both universities to put together their expertise regarding the inventory of carbon dioxide available, and that's the area that Dr. Boudlal works in. I work with storage and injection, and I recall Dr. Alexander, I know he does a range of things, but he works also with the security of that storage, and he touched on a little bit of that. So we at the time were focusing on carbon dioxide enhanced oil recovery. We later changed the name. So we got to a few major milestones by June 2018, working with our working groups. So we came together, all the institutions that I mentioned, the history is on the website, but all the institutions that I mentioned came together, and we would divide it into working groups that looked at subsurface, refining, commercial, legal and regulatory, environmental, of course, just everything that would have to go into it. So we don't, have any major omissions. And so the first thing that we needed to do was get the subsurface information in order. And fortunately, UTT was already working with Petrotrin. I'll call it Petrotrin until I get to the part of the story where it changes to heritage. So UTT was working with Petrotrin and the ministry to do certain studies, and those studies have since completed. But that jumpstarted understanding of what we have in terms of CO2 EOR and which reservoirs would be good candidates. We were looking at doing a pilot project, because before you put this type of thing on stream, because it's fairly expensive, you need to have a good idea of how it's going to work and have a good ideas on the numbers for our particular fields. We would have wanted to improve on the estimates for production based on historic information, and also storage, because in the past storage wasn't really tracked, and that is something that EMA wanted us to have a good handle on. So that was the major milestone we got to. We had our static model drilled, done up already, and we were ready to go running our simulations and so on. And then making a proposal to Petrotrin for, a pilot project through their acreage or one of their lease operators, right? So that was the thinking going forward. So we had a workshop with everybody together, because for this kind of thing, you really need to know that the left hand know what the right hand is doing. We had launched our newsletter, which was a way of keeping everyone in the loop, and also putting out some of the correct information on the technology. There were some and probably still are, some misconceptions about CO2 EOR. A lot of people were and are in different countries and locally concerned about the safety of CO2 piping and CO2 injection, right? So the newsletter dealt with several of those issues and also kept everyone in the loop of what was happening. We set out our project objectives and the working group's mandate, and I'll show you what the steering committee looked like and what our 3-month outlook was. But the main thing I want to show you here is some of what we saw as possible roadblocks, and that would put in context where we are now. So the first workshop, I want to draw your attention. You may recognize some names here in bold. I want to draw your attention to the wide range of people involved. We have from UE and UTT. We have from the Ministry of Energy. We have from Petrotrin, NGC, EMA, and NEC. This was well attended. It was a really great experience. I mean, you mightn't be able to tell from the names, but most of the people here, yes, were under the age of 40, right? So it was a group of some senior, but mainly, mid to junior career persons involved, and they were really excited about moving forward. There's a range of expertise in the room. We had engineers, geoscientists, chemical engineer, environmental officers from the EME. We also had a legal person, 2 legal people there, research assistants, so on and so forth. It was really great talking to people, especially who had like a first degree in geoscience and then a postgrad in petroleum, or first degree in chemical, and then they switched to petroleum and so on, because they were able to understand upstream, midstream, and downstream, and the interplay between the 3 for carbon capture and storage, because carbon capture and storage goes from upstream, well, it literally goes from downstream to upstream, but downstream, midstream, and upstream was all involved. And just having a room with engineers, it was quite an experience. I really enjoyed that aspect of us working together. So I jump now to the possible roadblocks. We had another workshop, and as I said, we had quite a few things lined up, and these were some of the possible workshops that we saw, and I was looking at it, and basically we met all of these roadblocks, from getting data, having confidentiality closures, and I had put this together since, I think 2018, and it just, everything happened. Basically that's all I can say. So the mitigation strategies was a bit challenging because there was a lot going on, and one of the big things that was happening was basically Petrotrin was closing operations, was going to cease operating as the main, as the national oil producer, right? So that was a major challenge for us to deal with, because Petrotrin was a key stakeholder, and without data from them and everything else that we depended on, that was problematic. But it happened even before the closure. Getting data, having permissions and so on was a major roadblock in having us all work together. We end up in this situation where some persons could see data and others couldn't. And, it's nice to have all the numbers together, and it's even nice for people to make speeches about young, bright persons getting involved in innovative solutions and so on. But sometimes when you hit the ground, it's just simply not happening, because we meet roadblocks like what you see on the left. And that's as much as I would say for that. Externally, there's some things that was out of our control. And we started talking to some suppliers about the cost of CO2. One of the challenges we have now is that the CO2 that you can get from the major supplier is basically food grade, and it's sold at that price. So that price would not work for field injection. It would be pretty expensive. We didn't get to the point where a pilot project was approved. We generally had acceptance from, I would say, the general public, you know, but that could drill down a bit more because the general public is not really informed about the science of it, but within the sector, you know, it was generally accepted. And we have moved forward with financing and so on for our Atlas. Just to answer one of the questions that is supposed to be covered within this section is what is one of the disadvantages of CCS is that it's really capital intensive. If we're looking at putting in a pipeline from Point Lisa, say, to fields onshore, even offshore, it would be fairly expensive to do so. And then there would be some work to be done on the approval side for the regulatory amendments and so on, for the volumes of CO2 that could be transported. And, you know, there are other legal factors that come in. So these are some of the things that we would have, that will have to be worked through, because it will happen. It's just not going to happen on the time scale that that we anticipated. We anticipated that by last year, we definitely would have gotten, you know, a pilot project is you inject, you know, into one well and you produce in another and you get your data from that. We was at this stage was supposed to be well ahead with having data, having an idea of how our reservoirs, our sands and so on would respond to it, how our particular heavy oil will respond to it, how, you know, and even be able to go so far as to say what our injection strategies would be like. So during the time that I would say we were waiting, there are some important things that we got done. The newsletter turned out to be a good way to keep in contact with all the stakeholders. There were a range of organizations interested in what we were doing, and that continued and showed up very clearly at our symposium, which was well subscribed. We had the Energy Chamber, we had all the leading international oil companies there. We had some of the smaller companies there, EMA, NEC, NGC, were all represented there at various levels, high level to junior staff, right? So the newsletter kept us in contact with them. Let me see. So that's about the newsletter. You can find all the past issues on the website. So that is where we were at the end of June. So we had gotten quite a lot done with very little. I can't even tell you what our budget was. Being CERM, the budget was basically just covering the cost of the newsletter, but on a wider scope, the things that would have contributed towards us having that implemented would have been through the funding of the studies that UTT was carrying out with the Ministry of Energy and with Heritage. And so in that vein, we've had support from the Ministry of Energy financially. Well, it wasn't CERM at the time, you know, the work with UTT and the Ministry and Heritage came before CERM was organized, and the ministry also funded the newsletter being printed. So by 2019, Petrogen was now Heritage Petroleum, and we wrote to them, and they, you know, said that they're interested in collaborating with CERM, but, you know, it takes a little while for a new company to really be able to spread its resources. We changed our name to include CCS, that's carbon capture and storage, in saline aquifers, in depleted gas reservoirs, and also to look at methane emissions. So the name changed to CO2 carbon emission reduction, I think. Yeah, mobilization. Then we had successfully held, this is UE and UTT, an international knowledge sharing symposium that spoke about developing a national CCS development program for Trinidad and Tobago. That was in October 2019. And then in 2020 was basically COVID. Now, as Dr. Alexander said, coming out of that symposium, what we decided to do as a first step is to establish a storage atlas. Now, a storage atlas is going to tell us where you can inject CO2 and how much you can store. Now, that's at the very highest level. So basically, you could say for a downstream operation that's emitting CO2, we could say, okay, this is their projected annual emissions, and this is where it can be stored for and can be injected, first for this amount of time and stored, right? So that is what we moved on to next. That's what we worked on for most of 2020. UE and UTT both have memoranda of understanding with UT Austin, and we also work for the Carbon Capture and Storage Center based in Canada, and we also collaborate and plan with the IEA GHG. So that is what we did for most of 2020. And UE and UTT, as Dr. Alexander said, attended the CO2, the COP, that's Conference of the Parties, 25 side meeting with UT Austin, and that happened in Madrid 2020. This year it should be in Edinburgh. We have been invited again to the side meeting. So this and some other things that we attended allowed us to network with CCS researchers worldwide and be able to advocate, and even the people that we might see as authors on papers, or they work within the World Bank, or have some experience with working with the Green Climate Fund and so on. We were able to get in direct contact with these persons. So that was a definite win, and it is ongoing. And that is what UE and UTT have been doing. So this is the name. Sorry, I put this slide in the wrong place, but basically we changed the name so that we could have greater reach and impact, and we could realize some synergies between CCS, CO2, EOR, and methane emissions. We can get, we could qualify for more funding, and we could leverage on the memorandum of understanding that we have with the institutions that I just mentioned. So where are we now? Well, after the symposium, we published the symposium report. That's on the website. We've been having monthly meetings, and what came out from that, some things, we worked on, and they, roadblocks, they didn't really turn out the way we expected. And so UE and UTT, right, prepared a proposal for the storage atlas and submitted that to the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. And so to answer the other question that was posed for this section of the presentation is, what is the government doing and where are we now? So after we sent that proposal to MEEI, I'm not sure, but the end result is that Cabinet established a steering committee and to implement, how did they say, CO2 EOR, and it involved Heritage, Atlantic LNG, NGC, the PS of the Ministry of Energy is the chair. So what is in the press release is what the government has done. They have mandated a steering committee to inject CO2, to increase oil recovery, and to store CO2. And we, that is UE and UTT, made presentations similar to, well, at least on this side, similar to this. UTT presented their studies, and that is where we are now. UE and UTT are preparing to attend the COP 26 side meeting as a conference of the party to the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention meeting. Should be attending that. And what else is going on? Sometimes I just miss some of the really big things. So Dr. Alexander, if you think of anything I missed, I'm winding up, feel free to add it afterwards. And we have received very strong positive indication that we will have funding to carry out the storage atlas. I use those words because unless I see things in writing, I'm like, okay, we're going to see what this is going to look like. But we have commitment. That's the phrase. We have commitment from the Ministry of Energy, and from the private sector. We have more companies coming on board so that we can complete this storage atlas for Trinidad and Tobago. You can think of it similar to the concession map, which shows you where oil and gas deposits are, right? So we will be developing something similar to a concession map where you can see where there's potential for CO2 storage and the volumes. And so we're looking at depleted hydrocarbons dereservoirs, and in some cases, well, this would take some research looking at if we can do enhanced gas recovery. Definitely we could do enhanced oil recovery, but we would need to quantify the CO2 that could be stored there, the CO2 storage capacity, and we would also need to monitor and ensure that there's a safe seal and there's no leakage. So to join with Dr. Alexander, what he said, there's a lot of scope for geoscientists and petroleum and reservoir engineers going forward. And if allowed, I'll make a plug here for the UE MSc program. We have 30 bursaries available. Applications close on July 31st. So if this is of interest to you, join, because we will need people on both sides to work on this new area for Trinidad and Tobago. Let me see, that may be the end of my presentation. I thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks, Dr. Sobers. We appreciate that plug in the after your presentation. It's always good to know what our opportunities may be. So again, thanks to both speakers for their presentation. I think they spoke exactly and more on what we had asked them to speak on. So we thank you for that. So I guess moving into the questions and comment section, and these questions were asked during Dr. Sobers' presentation. So I'm presuming these questions will be for you, Dr. Sobers. So
okay, I'll go through them as best as possible. Right, so the kinds of questions like who we got involved, and so we got everybody we could get involved, right? That's the long and short of it. And did we discuss with the major energy players, so on and so forth? Yes, we did. That's what we did. A lot of outreach and so on. That is what the workshop was about. That's what the newsletter was about. There were presentations made in person. And there's a certain range of things that we can and cannot do at particular times, SWOT analysis, so on and so forth. Yes, all of that was covered. I can't show all the details of everything. What I showed you with the roadblocks is known as a logical framework, and is simply a way of looking at what your weaknesses and threats are and attending to that. That's what you saw there. Collaborations with the IDB. Right, so collaborations with the IDB. So when it comes to CO2 emission reduction, there are particular institutions that you can go to. So if it's in storage, I mean, there are other ways to reduce emissions, and I'm not speaking about renewable and all the other ways. I'm not speaking about that. So when it comes to geologic storage, there's the Green Climate Fund that could be accessed, and that would deal with only saline aquifers. It is not going to deal with anything. I want you all to think about this. They're not going to deal with anything to increase profits for any oil company, okay? There are certain things if you're going to deal with profits, and that is why UE and UTT have been at the forefront. Once you put it forward as something that is going to profit a company, think about it. who can you go out to and say, please fund this, right? So we have those challenges. One, their institutions and their funds, they do not want to get a sniff of oil or natural gas anywhere near your project. They are not going to fund a cent of anything to do with increasing oil production or gas production, right? The IDB, I'm not sure why the person mentioned IDB in particular, but this kind of thing is not really along the lines of development per se. So I really don't think that may be in their remit. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that that is in their remit. So we work with the UN FCCC, and they have a Green Climate Fund. We also work when I say work, in conversation with, made applications to, spoke to their people. It would be the World Bank. And they spoke about the funds that they have dispersed to different countries and the conditions they were. So if you want to read up more on that, once again, check the symposium notes and so on. And I will give you a feel of what international funding bodies are looking for. And yeah, I think I covered everything. So then there's talk about BHP pulling out of exploration of oil and gas and fully adopting BHP pulling out of oil and gas exploration does not mean that they're going to stop drilling. It doesn't mean that they're going to stop producing. If they are already producing in a particular section and they have a plan to produce a different oil leg or gas, believe you me, they're going to get it, right? So exploration, do take note of when companies say they're going to stop exploration. Stopping exploration does not mean stopping production. And that is not directly related to what we're doing, but I know is important for you in your beginning of the career, thinking of what you have as your options going forward. And the way I see it, to what has been said before, fossil fuel is not going to disappear on a dime. There isn't going to be solar anytime soon for air travel. You still need aviation fluid. You still need bunker fuel. As you know, petroleum does not only make fuels, it also makes lubricants and components for plastics and a range of other things. And that is not going to stop. So be careful. They talk about reducing fossil fuel demand, but that is not the only thing we use petroleum organic products for. There's a demand for it, you know, all over, unless you're going to have your lubricants and your oil in your car and so on and so forth. Coming from plant-based, and then you compete with food, crops, grain, and so on. It's quite complex. And I just want to round off by saying that there is scope for geoscientists, reservoir engineers, petroleum engineers for quite some time.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Sobers. One other thing that people were asking, they were wondering how they could join the team and the website. I think the website is pasted in the chat, so you can click on the website if need be. So yeah.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Paul put the website there, and he also put the flyer there. And Dr. Alexander, how can you join the team? I like that question.
Is it the UE UTT team? They could start by accepting some of the bursaries that you all have, right? I think that eventually, naturally, as I mentioned, once CCS gets bigger and bigger with time, I showed a slide where 1 gigaton requires a capital investment and development almost the size of the oil and gas industry. So once you start doing your studies along those lines, whether it be petroleum engineering, reservoir engineering, and those type of things, then you naturally put yourself in place to be part of the team. There will be a lot of development courses coming up. There will be a lot of projects coming on stream, and there will be times when we'll actually be advertising for persons to join us. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
so there's a lot coming up.
The amount of work that we have, that we imagine that we have to do for the storage atlas we definitely would need research assistance and so on to get that volume of work done in the time that we need to get it done, and is in relatively short order. And yeah, basically it's a small team right now, and we're in the organizing phase, right? As soon as we get into more of the implementation, we'll be able to bring more people on board, and that will be happening fairly soon, right? Right, David?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
I see somebody said they wouldn't mind joining on a temporary basis. So feel free to reach out to us, send us emails, let us know what areas of interest you are interested in, and we will surely touch base with you all.
Yes, and you could find, if you need to contact us afterwards, I think it's easy to find our email addresses, his first name, last name, at our respective institutions. I probably should have put that up for mine. But you can find mine on the UWE website, lauren.subas@sta.uwe.edu. And so we could keep in contact with you, you know, when this really starts to expand exponentially.
Okay, great. So I think those were the questions probably in the chat. If anybody have any questions, you know, verbally, I guess y'all could just raise your hands and put on your mics and ask your questions.
There's a question on what is the role of geoscience in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. I'll leave that one to Dr. Sobas.
Okay. Well, we need to have a really good idea of the reservoir that we inject in CO2 into to ensure that we have a good seal. So the reservoir properties, in the same way that you would take a look at that for exploration and production, it would be the same thing for injection and storage. And we also need to get a really good understanding of what is happening with faults, if they're sealing, if they're non-sealing, if they're reactivated, when we change, because remember, as you produce the pressure in most fields, unless there's been gas reinjection or something like that, the pressure would go down, and then you put in a different fluid in to increase the pressure and so on. So geoscientists would help us with understanding the reservoir, so we'd know the extent of the reservoir, the properties of the reservoir, and the capacity of the reservoir, and also a good understanding if there's a shore seal, stratigraphically or volumetrically. I'm probably saying that the wrong way, but that's the role for geoscientists. Because for some of the areas, especially if it's saline aquifers and so on, so saline aquifers, they may not be as well characterized as an oil or gas reservoir. You know, people say, oh, there's water in the well, and keep it moving, right? So injection into saline aquifers would need to come up quite a bit in terms of understanding and being able to represent the properties of the reservoir. And you would get into probably more geostatistics, more artificial intelligence and machine learning and reservoir characterization to a very high level. Because it's not just injection and storage, it's actually monitoring also for the long term. And that'll be done by seismic and other means.
I'm seeing 2 questions on hydrogen. One is, do you see a challenge for water for hydrogen generation and the human population? And the short answer is most definitely. When you think about producing hydrogen from the traditional process of splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, then you need to have a really good water source. Recently, we were having conversations with the NEC about the same issue. And a lot of planning has to be done to be able to plan exactly how you're going to be producing hydrogen on a large-scale commercial basis, and where your source of water are going to be. So that is something that has to be considered. The second one about how much work has been done in blue hydrogen production in Trinidad. The person only knows about NewGen. Well, what NewGen has done recently is they have realized that it would be good to pull teams together. So they have formed a committee with UE, UTT, the Ministry of Energy, the Natural Gas Company, and so on. So they have pulled all the stakeholders together. And we had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago. And we are going through the stages of discussing what we are doing in the different areas. And I'm hopeful that from that type of conversation, we would see the development of blue hydrogen and green hydrogen once it's possible. But as per the first question, we have to think about where we'll source water from. So I'm thinking that that group will drive that. But from our understanding, we won't hear about hydrogen in any big way commercially with it until the year 2024, 2025. So I'm seeing a question, if I mean electrolysis of water for green hydrogen production. So the green hydrogen production will more or less mean you're going to use a renewable energy source, right? Blue hydrogen is when you, for those who don't know, is when you're going to use the normal methane production process to generate hydrogen and couple it with CCS. I've not heard about any projects in terms of blue hydrogen so far for us, but as I just mentioned, those things are possible, but it's in the green stages. We are now discussing those type of things. Yes, I'm seeing some other questions about postgrad qualifications for the MSc at UE, so I'll leave that to Dr. Sobers.
Yeah, yeah, we have quite a few people with undergraduates in chemical and process engineering. That's basically my undergrad. So yeah, should be fine. I don't know what, sorry, why am I not sure what an SME is?
SME is small and medium enterprise.
To become an SME, I can't see. I can't see. I have to think about that. So can you graduate from become an SME in CCUS and other related areas? Good question. Jay Toppy, I'm sorry, I can't answer that part of the question. Like the business side of it, I'll have to think about that. Yeah, I'll have to think about that.
Dr. Sobers, after evening. No, when I said SME, like a subject matter expert.
That's what I'm thinking. Basically, thank you. Basically, yeah, I have an undergrad in chemical engineering, and then I did petroleum engineering. The way our program is set up is for it to become, for it to be a conversion degree. So you start with the basics, and then you work up to the more advanced things. And so you can send us an email, and we could talk more about that offline, or you could check our website for more information. Yeah. I don't want to get too much into the UE thing now. I just want to keep it fair and open. You check our website. Is there anything else I'm missing? So the public awareness is very, very important. I'm seeing that question from Siobhan. That is really very important. However, at this stage, we have not launched out in that. Primarily, we're not set up to that, and we don't have funding to do that at this point in time. But working with some of our stakeholders, they may take the lead in that. But at this point, who we are is really a small group of lecturers from both universities, balancing teaching, research, and outreach. But this is a very important factor, and that's partly what the symposium was about. But for the general public, there's much more to be done, and we imagine that that is going to be a very crucial step at the right time.
Okay, great. Dr. Hussein raised his hand, so I believe he has a question.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation by both Dr. Alexander and Dr. Sobers. My question is, do you see a new direction for the Point Lisas industrial estate with regards to using direct air capture for CO2 and hydrogen generation and combination of both CO2 and hydrogen generation, and using renewables for the manufacture of green methanol and green ammonia. Thank you.
Well, Prof, that's why I interpreted SME to be small and medium enterprises, because there's a lot of conversation going around about what is the business aspects of CCS and renewable energy and those type of things these days in our headspace. What you are proposing there more or less is something that we more or less might see in future, but energy transition is not the easiest thing to accomplish. I mean, if you look back at the history, we are probably one of the last countries in the Caribbean to kick off the blocks in terms of doing renewable energy. In fact, we have been planning those two projects as a country with Shell partnering with BP, etc., to get those solar energy projects going. And so to convert the Point Lisa's industrial estate will require some doing. That's just my 2 cents on that. I'll pass you back to Dr. Sobers on that one.
Yeah, I would be a bit provocative and basically said no, there isn't a new direction. CCS is going to account for parts of the emission reduction: blue, green, brown, yellow, pink, hydrogen, energy, all going to have a role to play. There isn't any one technology that is going to deal with every situation, and it's not going to be applicable to every situation, and it's not going to be nationally appropriate for every country. So what I see going forward for the entire world is a mix of ways and means to reduce CO2 emissions, which would dominate. I think I would not go different to what the IE has put forward, and that's what David showed earlier on in his slide, the slice for each. So based on the forward look, I don't see a new direction. I see contributions from all various forms of emission reduction, avoidance, all of that. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Well said. I believe the same. Fossil fuel and the use of hydrocarbons will be with us for a long time. It is now left unto us how to manage these CO2 emissions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, two hanging questions. I say, what is the range of software? What range of software are pinpointing that they be needed for simulation aspects of the project? It depends on what aspect of the project you are speaking about. So if you want to clarify that, that will be helpful. Because surface, sorry.
Yeah, there's upstream, midstream, all of upstream, midstream, and downstream. You'd have to use some form of simulation to look at
all aspect has different simulators available. So if you want, you could probably say what aspect you are referring to. The next one is what is being done towards dealing with persons' uncertainties in terms of educating the public and providing a platform to source the information. So I think the website that Dr. Suba spoke about, the CERM, is one. We are doing as much talks as we can once we are invited. The third thing is we are incorporating it into our curriculum now. So the best way as universities to be able to dispense information is to make it part of our program. On the UTT side, we do have CCS incorporated into our program. I think Dr. Sobas will speak about what they do on their end. And so as we develop and go further, we also, as I showed in my presentation, we actually pulled all the stakeholders together and kept a symposium to be able to bring everybody on the same page. And that's why one of the reasons why the Geologic Storage Atlas came up. So I don't know, Dr. Sobas, you want to say what's done on your end?
Yeah, we are including CCS in our courses as part of our final group field project development. So in the past, where we would have looked at moving on to EOR and so on and stop at abandonment, we're now looking at, okay, instead of abandonment, what about storage in this field, and how much is that going to cost to transport, and so on and so forth. So like a full life cycle analysis that will be at the group field project level. And then within the various courses and so on, we would look at ensuring that students have an understanding of how CO2 would behave, the phase behavior of CO2 in the reservoir at the surface, the same way we do for natural gas and oil, and also for drilling and production and completions and so on. Those would actually get more complex, not less complex, as we go forward in the oil sector. There's a lot of work to be done. It's just unfortunate that now we're in a lengthy downtime. But you would find, as you hear more and more of what we're talking about, that it's not new things. We're still dealing with the reservoir. We still have to understand it. The oil sector, the oil energy sector, whatever you want to call it now, has been injecting fluids in the subsurface for the longest time. So injecting water, injecting gas, injecting polymers, those are not, brand new things for us. Probably for the politicians and the environmental engineers is something new. But the adjustments for us is it's within the range of what we could handle. And on both sides, UV and UTT, we've been doing research in the area. So it's I've been in this for about 15 years. And when I did my final project in Texas Tech in 2003, undergraduate, carbon capture, because I was on the chemical engineering side. Carbon capture was part of my project then, and I was in 2003. So it's not, totally new, and we're now trying to catch up per se, but we will be fit and ready to be able to include that into the work that we already do.
So Sean cleared up his question, but he said in preparation of the carbon atlas, he's assuming that the prospective storage site must be appraised and quantified on a simulative sense. What software? So to be honest, the universities that I'm aware have CMG. CMG is a pretty good software for doing that type of evaluation. It actually has a greenhouse gas package built in the software that models all aspects from dissolution, mixing, mineralization, and so on. So that's the software that we would be using to be able to properly assess from one aspect. When we move into the practical stage, at the lower levels, we'll be using analytical tools. We probably use MBAL for the tank models and so on. So, but for the detailed appraisals that you are talking about, we'll be using CMG.
Yeah, probably the last question. I think Mr. Toppy has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Joseph. Good afternoon again to the panel. So Dr. Sobers, I know a couple of my colleagues on the panel here would have asked about the public engagement a couple times. And I know you and Dr. Alexander would have spoken on it. One of the things that you mentioned was the cost aspect in terms of managing that side of it. I know, as we're seeing here, with the vaccination hesitation and stuff like that, public enlightenment, public knowledge then is critical to the success of these projects. Has the panel considered volunteerism? Because I know a couple of us asked about joining. Has the panel then considered volunteerism, in terms of putting together some information to disseminate then to the public, to better engage them and inform them of the importance of this type of work?
I like the direction that you're going with. David, if you don't mind, I'll take this question. At least this point of it. I like the direction that you're going with, and we would get back to the drawing board on that, because we really do need to get the message out regarding the technology and so on and so forth. And I'll throw the question back to David, because I remember some time ago he did a paper about public acceptance. And what we need to consider is that we have had 100 years, more than 100 years of oil and gas. We have NGC pipelines up and down this country. However, there may be information out there that that may have some people a bit hesitant about transporting carbon dioxide as a gas, even though we have natural gas being transported by pipeline, close to roadways, close to homes, close to, you know, we have that already. But CO2 injection is not only onshore, there's also offshore. So the risk to human beings could be relatively low if we avoid, much lower, so I should say, if we avoid built up areas. But even if we go in built up areas, that's for pipelines I'm speaking about in particular. That's where our partnership at CERM would lean on NGC. NGC has done a great job with pipeline safety and security all over this country. When it comes to leakage and storage, that's why we need to have a really good pilot project that shows that this is safe. But CO2 has been injected and transported in our country before. In the 1970s and the 1990s, it has been done. There were some issues with it. And since then we've had changes in rules and so on, but there are also some challenges if people are squatting on state lands and so on. It gets a bit complex, but I like where you're going with looking for volunteers and so on. And so that's something that I think we will table for our, when next we meet, so that those of you who are interested could come on board in a capacity like that, and that would actually be quite great. David?
Yeah, I mean, you covered it all. I mean, more or less, send your interest to us and we will discuss it at our next meeting.
Okay, thanks a lot, both doctors. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. So as we kind of looking to wrap up, is there any final things from both speakers that they would like to say?
I would just I know it's a student chapter, and I know that the energy sector is going through a rough time now, and on our end, we're doing as much as we can to have what we offer to you on both universities updated. And because of the work that we've done, you know, for the past few years, we are reaping the fruit with having funding for an atlas, a storage atlas, and that would secure how Trinidad and Tobago and the human resources we have going forward can be part of the solution to the challenges that we face going forward. And I just want to encourage you, for those of you who probably feel a bit bleak about the outlook for things, that there are things that are coming in place that are going to be right in line with your training and your knowledge. And the second part is that the fossil fuel, oil production, even drilling, production, completion is not going to go away for quite a few decades. So I appreciate your continued interest in the field, even at a time like this. And I look forward to, you know, the time when we could get together and have face-to-face discussion and really bounce ideas, you know, off each other and have fuller discussion and more ideas and suggestions coming from you on the way we can go forward once we have the resources to do it. So thank you again for your time and attention.
Yeah, I would simply say that for the 2 chapters, that the membership, just follow your passion, pursue your dreams, whatever you have interest in, just be the best at it. Once you make yourself the best at it, you will be successful. I closed off my presentation by saying that this is a big opportunity for geoscience and engineers. And the last point is, Trinidad and Tobago is not the only place you can work. This is really a global dynamics, and you can look for opportunities all over the world once you have the relevant training. And so Trinidad has no shortage of experts in the different areas that you would need to build your competence and develop to be able to stand up in the international arena. So you can make good use of it.
Yeah, guys. So thanks to Dr. Alexander and Dr. Sobers, you know, for their time and for their presentations on the topic. I think it was really well done, and for the answers that they provided to the questions. We appreciate you all very much. And again, on behalf of the UE student chapter and the UTT student chapter, we thank you all for your time here this afternoon. Before everybody probably runs away, just some probably quick announcements from our chapters respectively. The UE student chapter is currently involved in running a essay competition, and so the details of the competition is kind of given in the slide, but I know it's still loading. So what you all could do is, so this is the details of the competition. There are more stuff details wise. So what you all could do is just go to all social media pages or the contact information on the side there, and we will be able to just pop us a message, and we will get back to you with regards to that essay competition if you all are interested, right? There's also another diversity and inclusion event that is happening with student chapters within the region. They had a session last week Saturday, and there's also another session this Saturday. So you'll just have to register. You could also message us, and we will send you the relevant information. We have a kind of environmental initiative that is coming up. We call it the Let's Plant a Tree initiative, and you will get more information on that sometime next week. And then one of our planned activities for the month of August is to have a games night with ourselves, the UE student chapter and the UTT student chapter. So that is probably something to look forward to. It's not confirmed as yet, but we are looking to plan that activity. Evangeline is on the call, and she is the president for the UTT student chapter, and she would just give you all their events and announcements. So Evangeline.
Thank you, Daniel, and good evening, everyone. So on UTT-SP's side for the month of August, on the 11th, we have a digitalization and new energy session, and that will be at 5 p.m. And we also have on the 15th an energy realities competition. So this competition would actually be live, and we have great prizes to be won. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone participating in this. And currently we have a food drive initiative that we are running for the period of July 12th to August 16th. And this is geared towards university students. So we are also looking forward to your support in this as well. And our last event for August is a well completion engineering workshop. So this will be in partnership with Educave. And the date for this event is to be determined, but we have it carded for the last week in August. So be sure to stay connected with us, and all the information for these events will be posted within the coming weeks. So thank you, and back to you, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Evangeline. The information would be made available on all our social medias, which I think for both chapters include LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So and also via their respective emails. So you all could just check us out. I think it's easier as just typing in, UE SP student chapter or UTT SP student chapter, and you should be able to see the results for that from that search. So so to close again, I thank both the presenters for their talks this evening, and we appreciate you all very much. We are glad that you took the time to spend with us this evening. And for all the persons that attend, we are glad to have you as well, and we hope to see you at our next session. So I think that's it for today, and have a good evening, guys.